Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Well, today we're going to be looking at something pretty major: global population trends.
Yeah, this is a big one.
And, when we say trends, we're really focusing on declining birth rates around the world. So, kind of what does that mean for all of us?
Yeah, it's like a global shift that's happening. It's pretty wild to think about.
To help us unpack all of this, we've got a whole bunch of YouTube videos. We've got channels like Discover Top 10 Places, TVO Today, Good Times, Bad Times, Upton, David Lynn, GeoCapital, Economy Maven, GeoEconomy.
Oh, the
Annalee, yeah.
Center for Independent Studies.
Cole Hastings, Meconomy, Visual Economic EN, GEN, and even Cognize. Plus, like we always do, we've got some text excerpts to bring into the mix.
Yeah, we're trying to connect all the dots here. So really our mission today is to kind of figure out what is causing these changes in birth rates, why should we care, and what might the future hold for, all of us as the population potentially starts to shrink.
Right, because it really does make you think, what happens when the world isn't growing as fast anymore, or maybe even shrinking?
All right, let's jump right in. I want to start with the Discover Top 10 Places video.
Yeah.
Because they highlighted some pretty surprising countries that have some of the lowest populations in the world right now in 2024.
Oh, yeah. I was surprised by how many of those were European countries. It really, I think we often hear about declining birth rates in East Asia, but it's definitely a global thing.
It's not just a regional thing?
Not at all.
So to really understand why this is happening, we got to we need to understand what's called the demographic transition.
Yeah.
The Good Times, Bad Times video, they broke down the 5 stages of demographic transition, but what's the key takeaway for you?
Well, I mean, for most of human history, we had both high birth rates and high death rates.
Okay.
So population stayed kind of stable.
Yeah.
Then things changed. Modern medicine, better sanitation, people started living longer. Death rates just plummeted. But you know what? Birth rates, they stayed high for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where we got the huge population boom in the 20th century, the baby boom.
The baby boom, yeah. Okay, I'm starting to see the connection.
Exactly. But then here's the catch. As societies get wealthier and more developed, people tend to have fewer children.
Right.
So eventually those birth rates, they drop below what's needed to just replace the existing population, and that's when you start to see this decline.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think Good Times, Bad Times, they laid out some of the consequences. I mean, some of those projections, especially for places like China, were just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about China's population potentially declining by over 1 billion people by 2100.
Yeah. I mean, 1 billion people. It's hard to even grasp a number that big.
It's just massive. And it's not just China either. We're talking South Korea, Japan, certain parts of Europe. They're all looking at similar trends.
So, what happens when a country's population actually starts shrinking like that? TVO today kind of painted this, pretty serious picture, I would say.
It's serious stuff. Think about it.
Yeah.
A shrinking workforce.
Uh-huh.
Fewer people to fill the jobs, and the Economy Maven and GeoEconomy videos, they talked about this leading to labor shortages, maybe even slower economic growth, right?
Yeah, and then it's okay, well, who's going to support all the retirees if there are fewer young people working and paying taxes? TVO today brought up how this puts a strain on pensions and healthcare systems.
It's the domino effects, right?
Yeah.
One thing leads to another. And then on top of that, you've got potential geopolitical shifts.
Oh.
A country with a declining population, well, they might have less influence on the world stage. That TVO Today discussion about how this might change China's power was really interesting.
It really makes you think, yeah. Okay, so we've talked about what happens when populations decline, but what about the why? Why are people deciding to have fewer kids or no kids at all? The GEN video, they just went out and asked people on the street, and it seems like there isn't just one answer.
It's such a mix. Some people talked about finances, they just can't afford kids. Others were focused on their careers, or they want to travel or just have more freedom. It's different for everyone.
Right, and then you have those changing social norms. It's not like 50 years ago where having a big family was the expectation,
Things have definitely changed.
Yeah.
And the Analyses video on South Korea, that showed how much pressure young people are under. Super high cost of living, really demanding work culture. And then this idea that you have to be the perfect parent. It's a lot.
And it's okay, you're supposed to have this amazing career, own a home, give your kids the best of everything, but how do you actually do that in an environment that's so competitive? Like, it seems almost impossible.
Yeah. And that's probably why you see so many young people in South Korea, like putting off marriage and kids
Right.
or even deciding not to have them at all.
Yeah. And economy, I thought it was really interesting how they brought in all that historical context. Like, I never really thought about how much child mortality rates in the past affected family size.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. But back then, you need to have lots of kids just to make sure some of them survive.
Right. Totally different reality.
It shows you how far we've come with healthcare and living standards,
Hmm.
you know? But then, like we said earlier, those changes also bring new challenges, which is what we're talking about now, right?
Right. It's all interconnected. And of course, we can't forget about the changing role of women in all of this. I mean, GEN and Annalee both highlighted how more women are pursuing higher education, delaying marriage, and putting their careers first.
And some women are deciding not to have kids at all,
Oof.
which is a big shift from that, like, traditional idea of women mainly as wives and mothers, right?
Right. Huge shift.
And it's not just about personal choices either.
Mm.
Societal expectations, those play a big role too.
Yeah.
Gender roles are changing. Remember, Annalee touched on that. The different pressures men and women are
Right.
facing.
Yeah. Yeah. The different pressures.
Yeah, and it's like some men, they feel this pressure to be the main provider, but it's so expensive to live these days. How do you do it?
Right.
And then women, there's this pressure to do it all, have the career, have the family, and somehow make it all work.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And then we've got that Cognize video, which makes this really interesting point about female empowerment being connected to lower birth rates.
Hmm.
And it kind of makes sense. When women have access to education and good jobs, they have more control over their lives, including if and when they have children.
Yeah. And as Cognes pointed out, that's not just good for women, it's good for everyone. So, I mean, we've kind of painted a pretty complex picture here.
Right?
Declining birth rates driven by all sorts of factors, social, economic, cultural. And, while it's fantastic that women are gaining more say in how they live their lives, these declining birth rates, they also come with some potentially, worrying consequences.
Right. So it's like, what do we do about it? Can we really just accept that the future is going to be smaller?
Yeah, what's a country to do? I guess that's the question we'll have to save for the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely a lot more to unpack. Well, I think it's safe to say that, most countries aren't just going to sit back and watch their population shrink. They're trying all sorts of things, and some of them are actually pretty creative, I got to say.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are we talking about here?
Well, we saw this in a bunch of the videos. Melissa Kearney, Economy Maven, Upton, all talked about this. It's called pro-natalist policies.
Right.
Basically, it's the government stepping in and trying to, encourage people to have more babies.
So, are they just handing out cash to anyone who pops out a kid?
Well, yeah. Sometimes it really is that direct. Some countries offer straight-up cash bonuses for each kid you have. Others do tax breaks, or they give you subsidies for things.
Yeah, okay.
But it's not all about the money. Think about generous parental leave policies.
Mm.
Making sure there's good quality, affordable childcare. That kind of stuff can really help too.
Yeah, it makes sense. Having kids is expensive, so anything that helps out financially could be a big factor in people's decisions, right?
Right. But the big question is, do these policies actually work?
Yeah, do they?
Well, Economy Maven brought up the example of France. They've put a lot of effort into family-friendly policies, and, their birth rate is actually getting closer to that magic number of 2 children per woman,
Okay.
which is what they call the replacement level, right? Like the number you need to keep the population stable.
Right, right. But I guess if that's working in France, why isn't it working everywhere?
Well, it's tough, because even if you give people financial help, it doesn't make all those other worries go away, right? We talk about job security, the cost of living just keeps going up, then there's climate change, and who knows what's going on in the world politically, right?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about when you're deciding whether to bring a child into the world.
Totally. It's not just about, throwing money at the problem and hoping for the best.
Right. You have to tackle those bigger issues too, which kind of brings us to another idea that came up in a lot of the videos, immigration.
Yeah, Economy Maven, GEN, the coming global depopulation video,
Mm-hmm.
the one from the Center for Independent Studies, they all talked about immigration as a way to, help offset population decline.
And TVO today really dug into all the pluses and minuses.
Yeah, they had some great points. I mean, the basic idea is that welcoming immigrants can help fill those gaps in the workforce,
Mhm.
boost the economy, even bring in fresh perspectives and new ideas, which is always a good thing.
So win-win for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not always that simple. Like TVO today pointed out, immigration is a really complicated issue. It's political, it's social, it can be really tricky.
Yeah, there's always going to be debate about how many immigrants to let in, what skills we need, how to make sure they feel welcome and can integrate into society, right?
Exactly. And TVO Today made another interesting point about how a lot of countries have focused on attracting highly skilled immigrants, like doctors and engineers.
Okay.
They called it cream skimming because you're trying to get the best and brightest from other countries.
Makes sense. You want people who can hit the ground running, contribute right away. But is that, I don't know, is that sustainable?
That's a good question, because if more and more countries are facing population decline, they're all going to be competing for the same pool of skilled workers, right?
It's going to get competitive.
And then we have to think about the ethics of it all, too. It's got to be fair. Immigration policies should benefit everyone, not just the receiving country. Okay, so we've got pronatalist policies, we've got immigration, anything else. What else are countries thinking about?
Well, this was pretty futuristic. The Upton video about Japan talked about robots and automation, maybe helping to fill those worker shortages.
Oh, wow. Robots taking our jobs. It's like a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But in Japan, it's already happening. They have robots in healthcare, in hotels and restaurants, and of course in manufacturing. It's pretty mind-blowing.
So are you saying that in the future we're all going to have robot coworkers?
Well, it's definitely a possibility. Of course, that opens up a whole can of worms about, what happens to jobs, will people need to be retrained? How do we, adapt to a world where robots are doing more and more? Like Upton said, it's still early days. We don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely something to think about. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at what causes birth rates to decline, why it's a big deal, and we've explored some of the things countries are trying to do about it. What do you think are, the main takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to realize that we're in this new era, demographically speaking. Declining birth rates, they're not just a blip on the radar.
Yeah.
It's a global trend, and it's going to have a huge impact on everything. And although there are some potential solutions out there, there's no magic bullet. It's going to take a lot of effort. We have to look at the social, economic, even the technological side of things.
Yeah. Can just ignore it and hope it goes away. But here's something that's been on my mind. The Cole Hastings video talked about how throughout history, people have often overestimated population growth. So, I don't know, could we be making the same mistake here? Could we be overestimating, I don't know, maybe the challenges of a declining population?
You know what? That is a great point. It's definitely something to consider. I mean, on the one hand, a smaller population might be good for the environment, right? But on the other hand, what does it mean for our economies, our social safety nets, even how we design our cities? We've always planned for growth. What happens when that stops?
So what does this all mean for me, the average person? What should I be thinking about as I go about my day, knowing that, maybe the world's population might start shrinking pretty soon? I mean, it's kind of like we're heading into this, uncharted territory, right? For years, everyone's been talking about overpopulation, like it's this huge problem. But what if the real problem is figuring out how to live in a world with fewer people?
Yeah, it really flips the script, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it means we might have to rethink some of our basic assumptions. Think about it. Our economies, how we take care of people, even the way we design cities, it's all built around this idea that things are always going to keep growing. So what happens when that's not true anymore? What happens when growth slows down or even, goes in reverse?
So are you saying we need to, start planning for a future where less is the new more, smaller is better?
I think it's worth thinking about, for sure. It might mean we have to change how we measure success. Maybe it's not just about how much money we're making as a country, but about things like quality of life, how sustainable things are, how fair things are for everyone.
So it's we need to come up with a new definition of what progress actually means, right?
Right.
Especially in a world where there are fewer people.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because this isn't just about numbers, right? It's about how we adapt, how we come up with new solutions, how we create a future that works for everyone, even as the world around us is changing.
It's almost like a challenge to everyone, right? We need to be more aware, more clever about how we use resources, and maybe even work together more to figure all this out.
Couldn't have said it better. I think that's what makes these deep dives so important, right? We're giving people information, we're showing them all these different angles so they can understand this really complex world we live in.
Absolutely. Well said. So to all our listeners out there, a huge thank you for joining us for this deep dive into global population trends. I hope you learned a lot, maybe had some of your assumptions challenged, and hopefully you're walking away with a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of inspiration to, to think about the future.
Keep those brains buzzing. The future is, well, who knows what it holds, but one thing's for sure, it's going to be interesting.